Everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on this wet and chilly March night. We are delighted to have you here. My name is Beebe Flanders. I use she and her pronouns, and I serve as the Vice Chair of the Truro Climate Action Committee. And I am joined here this evening by our Chair, Carol Harris, in the back, another member, Rebecca Bruin, standing, and our intrepid volunteer, Georgia Neal, over there. We are delighted to have you. If you are concerned about climate change, if reading about wildfires and blizzards and droughts and floods gets you whipped up and you're not quite sure what to do with that anxiety and that energy, I suggest action. And those actions can be small, it could be changing habits, it could be coming here tonight to learn about our environment. It could be volunteering for the Truro Action Committee, the Climate Action Committee. We welcome all residents, part-time or full-time. If it interests you a little bit to do a little occasionally, that's great. If you want to be an ongoing volunteer, we welcome that. If you are a Truro voter and you really want to be a committee member, to feel part of this community, to do the most that you can, please, we invite you to apply for a position on our committee. We have open positions at the moment, and we would be thrilled to have your interest and your involvement. I think I passed out to many people a piece of paper that has the Truro Action Climate Committee information in terms of how to get in touch with us. You can also speak to any of us on the committee this evening if you have an interest, and we'd be delighted to give you more information. Before we get going with tonight's event, I want to tell you about there's opens right here if you want to sit. I want to tell you about two upcoming events. We have dedicated ourselves to bringing you an event almost every month through most of the year. Next month, Laura Ludwig, who's the director of the Marine Debris and Plastics at the Center for Coastal Studies up in Provincetown, will be here to give a pre-Earth Day talk about the impact of plastics on ocean and marine health. And she'll also share with us how we can make positive differences, both in our habits and in our wallets. Then in May, we will have Lauren McKean from the Cape Cod National Seashore. She's going to come and talk about energy, transportation, waste, and night sky-friendly lighting. Both of these events will be also on Thursday evenings, so keep your eyes out for posters around town, as well as your eyes out for emails in your inboxes. If you are new to one of these presentations this evening and you are interested in receiving emails about the Climate Action Committee, there's a sign-up sheet there. Just give us your email. We will add it to our list, and we would be delighted to let you know about our actions and our presentations and ongoing projects. As always, I need to thank our library staff. These evenings are in conjunction. It's the Truro Climate Action Committee in cooperation with the library. That cooperation, that relationship is what makes these ongoing events possible. And this is mostly due to Justine Alton in the back, who is the outreach coordinator here at the library, and she is the one who makes these possible. She's there filming us all. These videos are available on the Truro Library website. It usually takes maybe a week or two to get them there, but they're not. Sorry.
They're on our YouTube channel.
They're on the YouTube, the Truro Library YouTube channel. Maybe on TikTok. They're on the YouTube channel. But if you missed it or someone you know missed this and wanted to know more about it, you can access through YouTube the evening. Finally, we are here tonight as the second in a three-part series about the Outer Cape water health. And tonight we have Emily Beebe, our Health and Conservation Officer here in Truro, as well as Cody Salisbury, who is the Provincetown Water System Superintendent. And they are going to be telling us about the history of the shared water resource between Truro and Provincetown of fresh waters, which is an interesting relationship that I actually don't know much about in terms of its history, and look forward to hearing more. They will also be addressing the current water needs of both towns and efforts to protect the water, the fresh water that we have and that we share together. At the end of their presentation, there will be a question and answer period. So I ask that you use those pieces of paper that I gave you to write down any questions you might have and save it for the end so that we can really get through all of the information and then address your questions and concerns. If you simply need to understand a part of the presentation in order to go on, raise your hand and Cody or Emily will answer it. But if it's possible to note what you are interested in learning about and then wait until the end, we'd appreciate that. That way we can kind of get through all of the information this evening and get you home in time for bed or the State of the Union address, whichever you prefer. Anyway, thank you again for being here. It is a delight to have you and we really appreciate your participation. Emily and Cody, take it away.
Thank you very much for being here. There's a lot of folks here that I don't know, and that is exciting because I find that that we have a lot of folks that are always at all the events. So welcome to everybody. My name's Emily Beebe, and this is Cody, and we are both here to answer your questions. So I'm going to let Cody open it up and keep rolling.
So for those of you that don't know, I'm Cody Salisbury. I'm the water superintendent in Provincetown. I've been with the town of Provincetown for 15 years this year. Time flies. I've been the superintendent for almost 11 of those. So tried to put some slides together that really do outline the history of the department, when it started and so on. And we'll show you the outline, which should
Click along. Maybe down there. Now we're on 2, right?
Yep. See if we've got a problem here. Should be on the top of these. That's interesting. Exit out. Start from the beginning again.
There you go. Nice.
So here's the outline that we're looking at this evening. We're looking at the history, the overall history of the water system, key dates of legislation over the years, our system at a glance, and how it's laid out and so on. The locations of the existing well fields and facilities, Zone 2 protection areas of those wells, the water treatment operation, and our sampling schedule, and what we do on a routine basis. The current intermunicipal agreement that we have between the two towns, the framework of our water and sewer board, and what the future is for the Provincetown system. Oh, my mouse stopped working.
Here we go.
All right, so this timeline is something I put together to hit the key points over the last 125 years. Some of these may be a little difficult to see because of the size of the screen, but the system was first put together in 1892. It's even hard for me to read on this screen. In 1892 was the Acts of 1889, Chapter 176 is when Provincetown established the public system, and I have a map in my office that actually outlines the distribution system from that time. So shortly thereafter, we've actually exposed some pipe in the ground on Bradford Street in Provincetown that actually showed the 1892 cast iron stamp. So shortly within that time frame, the system started being installed. Fast forward to 1907, Chapter 483 authorized an eminent domain taking out here within the town of Truro. And that is our site that's currently located at 143 Shore Road. That's the Knowles Crossing Water Treatment Facility. That was the original well site located in Truro. Prior to that, the town had a small treatment system on what is now Race Point Road. We have some history of that as well. Water quality was not very good at that site. It was very high in iron, low capacity wells. So the system had overall problems because back in those days, the treatment really wasn't up to par. So in order to seek a better supply, this is what happened in 1907, and the Knowles Crossing well field was established. There was a distribution system study done in 1931 as the town started to expand, kind of was starting to outgrow the layout of the current system. That recognized the need for a 1 million gallon steel standpipe. That standpipe stood, was constructed in 1936, and that standpipe, some of you may remember, it was a riveted standpipe, stood on Winslow Street up until about 10 years ago when the town decommissioned that and we tore it down. And the reason for that is you know, it was at the end of its useful life. In 1952, we expanded yet again within the town of Truro. We needed more supply, so in 1952 there was another act for an eminent domain taking, and that was on South Hollow Road. So the pumping station and well field that you see on South Hollow Road, that's what this was in 1952, and those wells were constructed shortly thereafter, 1953 and 1954. In 1964, that's when the Mount Gilboa tank was built, and that's the one on the edge of the highway that you see when you're driving into Provincetown. That tank was done. 1976 was the large tank that still stands on Winslow Street, and again that was constructed while the other tank was still in service. The small riveted tank that I mentioned, constructed in 36. And then when we got to 1978, some of you may have lived in town and experienced the gasoline spill, the gasoline contamination that happened. There was a small service station on Route 6. There was a buried underground gasoline tank that leaked for many years and went unnoticed. That actually contaminated the South Hollow well supply. That was a major ordeal, not only for the town of Provincetown, but also for the Commonwealth. There was a lot of documentation on that, and we still have a lot of that history. The town sought funding to remediate the gasoline spill. There was a treatment system put in, and it was extensive for its time to remediate that site. The issue that we had was we could not meet our peak demands without that well site being online, so the town had to look elsewhere and withdraw water from additional wells if possible. That is when we started to rely on the one well at the time at the former Air Force Base. Became 2 wells. Those are known as wells 4 and 5 within the Cape Cod National Seashore. But prior to that, it was still part of the Air Force Base. We operated those wells all throughout the 1980s and 1990s on a seasonal basis in order to meet peak demand, even after South Hollow was put back online and in service fully. Throughout that time period, we were looking for a permanent alternative supply because our needs were growing throughout the system, and we needed that redundancy. We worked collectively with the town of Truro. We knew that likely that source would be located within the town of Truro. We worked throughout many years with site investigations, trying to find a site that would be suitable for additional capacity. I'll skip over that for one moment because I referenced that the steel standpipe was taken down in 2011, and in 2013, finally that well site came online, and that was North Union Field. North Union Field is located just adjacent to the Walsh property. Some folks know that area as Seventh Heaven. I know that there's people out here that refer to it as that. We access that from Old Dew Line Road down Old Kings Highway, and it's back in a wooded site back there, and it's a very good producer for us. That's been online since 2013, and we have not relied on those former Air Force Base wells since. Present day is where we are now, and we are back to having further discussions with the town of Truro, collectively looking to potentially expand within Truro, as well as seek alternative supplies that could serve both communities' needs into the future. Anything to add there, Emily?
No, I think you're Doing great.
So when we look at our system at a glance, this is a slide that I use for our Board of Selectmen frequently. With the changing of the boards, most people don't really fully understand what we're operating. We have a total of 3 groundwater sources in the town of Truro. That's the Knowles Crossing site, North Union Field, and the Paul Daly well field, or South Hollow well field. The well field itself is known as Paul Daly. He was the former superintendent for many years when the gasoline spill happened and so on. So they're used interchangeably, but the well site by the state is technically known as Paul Daly. There's 6 active wells at that site, 3 active wells at Knowles Crossing, and the North Union site has 2 gravel-packed wells. We are classified as a distribution system 3 out of a possible 4, and we're a treatment grade 2 system with the new plant that went online about 10 years ago.
At Knowles Heights.
Yep, at Knowles Crossing. We'll show some slides of that facility. We have 2 water treatment facilities. We have one on South Hollow Road, and we also have the Knowles Crossing treatment plant at 143 Shore Road. We'll get into a little bit more of that in further slides. The water distribution system is approximately 45. It's probably a little higher than that at the moment. I think it's closer to 48 miles of pipe. We have a booster pump station on South Hollow Road, 2 water storage tank facilities, about 300 fire hydrants, close to 1,000 gate valves, and we have almost 4,100 service accounts, and over 500 of those are in North Truro. This is the map of our current system. So when we look at this, we'll get into more of these green shaded areas in a later slide. Those are what we refer to as zone 2s, but we'll cover that in a few moments. Essentially, those are where our well sites are located. That is where Knowles Crossing is, South Hollow, North Union Field,
The green blobs.
the green blobs, and we'll show you in more detail in a slide coming up. You can see it's a very linear system. We're pumping water from that area of North Truro, serving properties along the way, and it goes down Route 6A into Provincetown. And we have one spur from the main system out to feed Race Point in the National Seashore. So for our source supply locations, I think this slide, and many may know, especially if you're attending these meetings, especially the last one, I think. The Cape is a sole source aquifer by the definition of the EPA. And the reason for that is it's solely groundwater. And that's what makes up 100% of the Cape's systems. I think there is a portion of Falmouth that is surface water, but for the most part, 100% of Cape Cod is groundwater. And obviously the highly permeable soil conditions make it highly susceptible to contamination from land use and so on, as we just mentioned from the contamination almost 40 years ago. It's over 40 years
It's
now.
more, yeah, it's 50.
This is a snapshot that the Cape Cod Commission has on their website, which is a good one. This shows the different lenses throughout the Cape. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of water down in the Sagamore and Monomoy lens. And as you get out this way, especially in the Pilgrim lens, it's a very thin, shallow lens out there. So you can imagine that's why when we looked, when the town investigated those areas in the Pilgrim lens, the capacity is very low. You can get some decent drinking water in some areas there, but it's just not a high volume capacity. This, I believe, this slide or similar slide has been shown in the past at this committee, but this is a great illustration that was taken. I took it from the USGS. It's known as the John Masterson report in 2004. There was extensive modeling work done by the USGS in this area, specifically as it relates to saltwater intrusion or saltwater upconing. So this illustration was looking at some of our well sources, and you can see when you sink wells into this freshwater lens that sits on top of dense salt water, as we pump those wells at a high rate, we start to see this upconing effect of the salt water underneath. We've modeled that for many years and have an understanding of how much we can withdraw. And we also, with the North Union Field site, we perform extensive monitoring out there. Our staff performs that in-house, and we have records since it went online over 10 years ago with how that well field is behaving over time as we withdraw water. But this is essential. This is a great illustration to show what happens there. I don't know if you want to talk about the properties.
Sure. This slide really just shows you the visual of Provincetown-owned properties within the town of Truro. So it's a little surprising, when you see it, but I think it's a good illustration. The next slide shows you up close the Knowles Crossing site, and when a municipality is responsible for the water quality from a well, you have to own all of the land around the well point itself for a certain distance and control it. And so the property being purchased by the town of Provincetown makes sense as a way of controlling their Zone 1 area.
Yeah, so this is actually the parcel that was taken in 1907. These surrounding parcels that you see, these smaller squares, they're almost residential parcels. I'd have to look when the town purchased those. It's probably some point in the 1980s, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the water treatment plant is.
Yep.
Well, the larger one.
So this table this lists our current sources that I mentioned, gives our public water system ID, but specifically shows the withdrawal capacities from each of these sources. So you can see we have this broken down by an annual average daily withdrawal, and that chunk is 0.85. So Mass DEP regulates how much water we can withdraw. And it gets a little tricky because North Union Field, when we look over here at this max day withdrawal at 0.374, that's 734,000 gallons, that's regulated by a permit. So our max daily withdrawal we can take from that well site is 734,000. And these other numbers we're looking at, we know are safe yield numbers based on the aquifer conditions and so on. But we cannot exceed an annual daily average of 850,000. So any one day, busy day in August or July, we may pump 1.7 million, 1.8 million total from our well supplies. But when we look at an annual average, we can't exceed 850. And just to put that, we'll show in the next slide, actually, this is a good example. This is 2019 to 23 overall pumping. And no surprise here that July and August were way up. The green line should be thrown out. That's the COVID year in 2020. But you can see last year we exceeded 40 million in July.
It's like the turquoise kind of blue.
It's like the light blue color. Which was the first time in actually quite some time that we broke 40 million in July. That used to be a regular occurrence in the 90s and into the 2000s. Mm-hmm. Increased conservation has greatly reduced that. But you can see the trend is very predictable. We have, if I looked back even 10, 12, 15 years, this trend is going to look the same for the most part. This is a little higher quality view of the Zone 2 areas. So you can see the Knowles Crossing site and that red circle around, it's not a circle, but the blob around it, and the respective sites. Those are what we call Zone 2 areas, and the definition at the bottom is that's the area of the aquifer which contributes water to a well under the most severe pumping and recharge conditions that can be realistically anticipated. Like 180 days of safe yield pumping with no recharge. So these are drought conditions. That's what this safe yield or zone 2 area is. This is not just how these are delineated is by science. Models, our consulting engineers submit this based on aquifer models, and DEP has to accept these. So these aren't just drawn on a map.
Like the zone 1.
Like the zone 1. The zone 1 area around a wellhead is 400-foot radius. That's a set radius. And when Emily was talking earlier about owning that, the public water supply has to own and control that zone 1 area.
And so just to draw a quick parallel, a residential well has basically a zone 1 of 100 feet, but it is not regulated in the way that a non-community or community water supply well, zone 1 is regulated. In the zone 1 of a public well, be it non-community or community, meaning be it a restaurant or a municipality, nothing can go on within that area. No buildings, no roadways, no dog houses. It needs to be free and clear of any structures or any uses other than water. And that's a heavily regulated zone. The zone 2, less heavily regulated, but still pretty highly regulated compared to other areas. The zone 2 of a municipal water supply needs to be protected and dealt with differently than other parts of town because of that ability of the land, basically, and the uses of the land to impact the public water supply well.
Which
And
segues
so,
into your next.
Yes, and so that map that you just saw with the pink blobs, that is a map that your GIS department put together, right? Provincetown GIS put together, and it reflects all of the zone 2s now that we have in place since North Union Field came on. In our zoning bylaws, we do have regulations that protect the zone 2s. They're called Water Resource Protection Overlay District, basically is what it is. And the zone 2 areas are protected under, I believe it's chapter 30, section 4 of our regulations. I'm giving you the granular because this is going back to town meeting this spring with this map that the GIS department from Provincetown prepared for us. Because the map that we have in place right now is from about 1990. It's the photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. It does not show North Union Field, so we're updating it, and it's going to require a town meeting vote to accept it into our zoning bylaws. There'll be a couple of connector sections of the bylaws that will need to be modified in order to update it all, but that's coming soon to a town meeting near you.
Yeah, and that was because the zone 2 for North Union Field extended further south to Long Nook Road, I believe this is on the map. So we'll get into the treatment process a little bit. This is taken directly from one of our reports that we'll get into later that we publicize every year, the annual water quality report. But we treat the water with sodium hypochlorite, bleach, basically, as a disinfectant, which is a very common, useful disinfectant for public water supplies. And we treat everything going out to the system as disinfected. We also use potassium hydroxide, and that's to raise the pH. The groundwater is a slightly lower pH, so we bring the pH up. And we also, when we put the Knowles Crossing facility online, we're treating primarily over there for iron and manganese. So iron and manganese are found in groundwater, and we'll get into the treatment process in the next screen, but that involves oxidizing the iron and manganese out of solution so that we can filter that and produce a good product. This slide illustrates, it's my attempt to illustrate what we're doing over there at the facility. So that facility on Shore Road, for those of you that don't know, again, it's at 143. I'm always amazed at the people that they don't know we're down there.
Right.
It's
almost across from Kaplansky.
It is, yeah, and it's down a hill. You can't really see it from the road, especially when the foliage is out. But that's where the facility is, and we're treating both the Knowles Crossing wells, the 3 wells at that site, as well as the South Hollow well field at this facility. So South Hollow, we're getting the water to this facility by a raw water transmission main down Route 6. That was put in when the facility was built about 11 years ago or so. It was all the way down Route 6 and essentially comes into the facility. And we're using the potassium hydroxide, we call it pre-KOH in our system, and that's to raise the pH up a little bit. And we're also using potassium permanganate, which we mix on site, and that's a kind of a nasty chemical. It looks like a purple juice, like a Kool-Aid almost. And our operators do a great job. It requires careful monitoring of how much is required to oxidize that iron and manganese, because the result, if you overfeed, is pink water, believe it or not. So it's a pretty automated process, but it's still some manual adjustments and so on that goes into that. That goes into an underground storage tank called an oxidation or equalization tank, where it gets sufficient mixing time to be able to drop the iron and manganese out of solution. Ultimately goes through these membrane filters and into a clear well. Prior to the clear well is where we disinfect the water. It gets sufficient mixing time in that tank, and then it's out to the distribution system where we're raising the pH just a little bit more for the system pH, and it goes out to the homes and the tanks. These filters require backwashing because they obviously get sediment buildup on them. So they backwash every 45 minutes to an hour, and those are sent to a couple lagoons that we have on the site that ultimately just filter back into the groundwater, and it captures the sediment on top of the sand layer.
It's pretty awesome, I have to say. It's a lot when you go to the plant and you see those filters. They're like microfilters, right?
Yeah, they're really, I should have put a slide in here to show, but when you take one apart, it's thousands of spaghetti fibers is what it looks like. Believe it or not, you can actually get leaks in individual spaghetti fiber where it compromises the filtration process. These things are automated to test themselves, and our operators actually have to isolate those tiny little leaks. It's pretty cool. This is a picture of the facility when it was built back in 2013. I didn't have a current picture from this view. And that's inside the plant. You can see these large pumps here. And this is the tank that I'm referring to. That's holds about 30,000 gallons. And the clear well that I referred to that goes out to the distribution system is also 30,000, roughly.
And just to point out, there's now solar panels on the
Yes,
roof of
there
the
is.
building. It's the largest solar array in Truro. Thank you.
I think we completed that about 7-8 years ago, maybe. It's been a little bit.
It's cool.
The treatment process for North Union Field is much more simple. We have the 2 wells out there that again produce 734,000 a day. Those get piped to the South Hollow Road facility where we're simply adjusting the pH and disinfecting, and it's out the door. The process there is quite simple. North Union Field produces excellent water, non-detectable iron or manganese at this point, and actually a very good pH coming out of the ground, so it needs minimal adjustment. The portion of North Truro that serves the safety building as well as the school and the savory and so on, that area, since there is not an elevated tank out in that area, we have a booster pump station in order to maintain sufficient pressure up there and fire flow. That booster station is also located at South Hollow Road. Did you have something to add about the last screen?
Nope.
Okay.
Thanks.
So after treatment, what do we do for sampling? Obviously, we're regulated by both the EPA and Mass DEP. Most people don't understand the amount of sampling and requirements that go into operating a public water system, truthfully. There's something out there that most folks think bottled water is safer to drink. I will tell you that Provincetown produces an excellent quality water. And it's not just because I'm the superintendent. I'm gonna say it's a very good quality water. We have to sample, everything you see here is on our required sampling plan from Mass DEP, which ranges from asbestos, because we do have old asbestos cement pipe in the system. It was a very common material. We have certain areas we have to sample for. Monthly, we're sampling for chlorine. Some things we're on reduced monitoring because we don't exceed certain thresholds, such as lead and copper. Perchlorate, we don't sample for that very often. Anything on this list is a routine basis. It's either quarterly, annually, or every 3 years. PFAS 6 is the one that most people ask about. Have we ever sampled for PFAS? Yes, we have. We're one of the fortunate communities right now on the Cape and in Massachusetts that we do not have any detections of PFAS. We had very, very minimal detections when we sampled for a well below the threshold. We're talking barely detectable by the equipment when we sampled a voluntary round for Mass DEP. However, that was not in the finished water going out to the system. We haven't had anything detectable going out into the distribution system for PFAS. These are evolving contaminants and regulations. We are in the midst of sampling right now for what's called unregulated contaminant monitoring rule number 5, and that's from the EPA, which is all PFAS compounds. The first round we conducted back in October of last year, I believe, or December. I know that we have another round in April due, and in that first round we didn't have any detections either. So it shows that we've done a good job with watershed protection. There's many communities having to scramble to meet these requirements, and we're lucky.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to those, every month we're sampling for bacteria. Because of the seasonal nature, we only are required to sample 3 in the off season. We actually sample 4, but we sample 4 October through March, and then in the peak season we sample 25 every month, and that's in addition to both tanks and the treatment plants. So we have to sample the raw water coming into the plant, the finished water going out of each plant, both of the standpipes and the tanks, and as well as 25 sites in the distribution system.
25 times a month? Or
25 times a month is what I
Okay.
should say.
Yeah.
Some of these sites are sampled more than once,
Mhm.
but we have to conduct 25, and it's a required, plan by the state, an approved plan, and we actually use monitoring stations throughout the system for the most part. We don't go into homes and businesses. We have monitoring stations on the roadside that we sample right at the water main.
just some
Stuff.
awards.
Yeah, I just thought we'd brag a little bit since we haven't. Truthfully, we are proud of this. It's a testament to the staff that we have right now. I have an outstanding staff, and they do a great job, and they make my life a lot easier. We've done a great job, and truthfully, we haven't received one of these awards in many, many years for Provincetown. And starting in 2019, we've gotten 4 of them. So we've done a good job. We got skipped in 2022,
Yes,
but
agreed.
we came back on top.
Before we leave this slide, though, how many staff do you have? And because we see them around quite a bit, out checking meters and that sort of thing.
We have a total in the field between treatment operators. We have 2 dedicated treatment operators,
Yep.
And we have 5 field staff, which includes a supervisor, and then 4 people that work in distribution, essentially, between meter work, distribution, and then 2 in the office and myself. So staff total is 10.
And so meter work is going to be changing out meters, but also meter reading?
Correct.
And that's like a drive-by
Yep.
signal that's caught? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That's somewhat automated. We read meters electronically through a radio signal, but meter maintenance is heavy. We always have, problems either with a radio or a meter, and people have to get access to those meters. This is anybody that wants to ever see what we sample or what our results were, I highly encourage you to obtain a copy of our annual water quality report. This is a snapshot of last year's report, the 2022 report. 2023 isn't due until July 1st, and I illustrate that on a slide coming up. But that's the requirement, is July 1st every year. But we report anything that we've detected in the system. We're not required to report anything that we don't detect. So you can see here, chlorine, haloacetic acids, total trihalomethanes, those are disinfection byproducts, and those are very, very low numbers, by the way. Lead and copper was last done as of this report, 2020. Once you see this year's report, it will reflect 2023 because we did sample last year. These are the unregulated contaminants, such as manganese and chloroform, sodium. And sodium does get reported to the Board of Health of both towns, by the way, is required. Because I had a lot of calls on PFAS 6, and again, we're not required to report this here, but most folks wanted to know. And I didn't have the table on there originally showing that we didn't have detections, but we included that because we were getting a lot of calls as folks read about this in the newspaper, and we thought it was a good idea to just include.
Cody, how do we access this information? It's on the website?
Good question. So, again, due every year, July 1st. We produce this earlier than July 1st because what we do is it's printed on, there's a link, a direct link to that report on everybody's bill. So when you receive your bill, and this changed, it's been a long time since the EPA changed this requirement, at least 10 years. This meets the requirement. We used to snail mail these every year, but now a direct link meets the requirement for distribution of these reports. So it's at the bottom down here. You can see, here's your direct link, and if you type that in, it'll take you directly to the Consumer Confidence Report. It's also available on our website. This was just a quick snapshot of, if you navigate to Provincetown Water Department, you'll see on the main page more information, annual water quality reports, and we have the current one right there with a click to the PDF document, and we also have them all the way back to 2000. That's the pumpage back to 04. I believe the past water quality reports are actually back to 99. So you can take a look many years. Let me hit on the IMA.
You want to get started? We'll
Sure.
just-
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
For the sodium, I know it's specific, but it was out of range for this year. And I know when we get reports from our wells, when sodium is too high, there's actually a notice that they attach to that for households where you have someone with cardiac or compromise, because it's where you're monitoring the amount of sodium. Do you have that similar alert? I mean, we're getting it from the testing labs, but do you have a similar alert?
For a private well, you mean? For
Yeah, but I mean, I'm thinking more of the town, so that's being measured at the end before it goes into homes. So I know if you're monitoring sodium intake and if that level's high, and it's been creeping up in our wells, the sodium levels, I just didn't know.
Yeah, so we would have a similar notification requirement. You can see this last one off the top of my head. I want to say it's 20 or 30. 30 parts per million was the highest detected. So the range was 17 to 30. And those, when we look at these numbers, I should point out a lot of these tables reflect things that are entering the distribution system, except bacteria. So that sodium is one of the...
Raw.
No,
right?
it's finished water.
Oh, okay.
So it's finished drinking water going to the system. But the low range likely was at South Hollow Road. South Hollow Road for the North Union site was 17 parts per million, milligrams per liter. And on the high side was 30. So I don't think off the top of my head, I don't think we're required to report unless it's in excess of.
Recommended
I think
limit,
it's
not an
50 though
MCA.
for, yeah, it's not an MCL,
Right.
it's an MCL goal.
Right.
But we're required to report any detection anyway. Anytime we sample sodium in this regard, it gets reported to the Board of Health as well as on this report.
But for consumer reporting, it's going to be is it a consumer confidence report, the
Yes.
annual report? Okay,
Yes.
and that's something that is linked then to the bill. So
Correct.
it's a long way of saying yes, and this is how.
For the person who's
It-
not gonna read that table, it's, you know, that's.
A little convoluted.
Yeah.
No, but I mean for someone who has a heart condition that.
Right.
that may impact them.
Right, because of the fact it's not a maximum contaminant level by the state, we wouldn't be required to report something. Number one, that's really not considered high. That's pretty actually average numbers on the Cape, considering where we're located. But I'm not sure what you're experiencing in your private well. But
Well, it's just when we received our last water test, which we do yearly, it had an asterisk, a flag by it saying, you know, you're just over it. If you you may want to consider using.
probably it's 20.
Right, it is
Maybe.
20, yeah,
20.
recommended
Yeah, that's-
level. It's a good question, Sue.
Okay, so both towns, as mentioned in that history timeline, operate under an intermunicipal agreement. So it's basically a legal framework that outlines tasks and requirements of both communities. The first one was executed in 1982. There was a lapse, I believe, in at some point in 2008, maybe.
Right before this
Yeah,
iteration.
2006, 7, 8.
Right.
There was a lapse where the document had expired. The town of Provincetown was working on acquiring North Union Field, or at least developing that site. So I think it was just there was some wait time until that was performed, and then once that was all outlined, it's in the agreement, and that was done in 2010. Again, the IMA outlines a lot of terms and conditions, such as Provincetown agrees it will not increase land area beyond the existing in 1981. And it specifically says by eminent domain powers exercised in 1907 and 1952. We also will not sink additional wells on those sites. Truro agrees they will actively support and cooperate with respect to planning long-range water supply, and Truro agrees they shall not introduce any form of legislation or action that would restrict the taking of water in Truro by Provincetown.
Which was done in the past and became a Senate bill and did not move past the Senate. But it really was at a time when relations were starting to get very edgy. And we've evolved since then, learned a lot from things like that. I think that's where we are
When
now.
was that? When was that?
I believe it was
Probably early, could have been in the 90s.
maybe early 90s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The IMA outlines some specific deliverables in the document that we should jointly develop, and those main documents are Water System Master Plan, which identifies possible water supply sites and capital planning for the department or the system. That plan was last updated. There was a comprehensive plan done in 2002, and that was updated in 2017. And we're looking to update that yet again to incorporate some of the recent demand forecasting that we perform for both communities and so on, incorporate that into the master plan. A watershed management plan is also outlined in the document, and we're working on that. And that plan is specifically for the Pamet Lens that coordinates withdrawals across all sources, and it's really looking to, it's a watershed protection plan, essentially is what it is. And incorporating some well withdrawal stuff in there, I think.
Mm-hmm. It basically lays the ground for the master plan. The management plan informs the master plan. What can go into further developments and expansions really is dictated by the management plan and what's found.
So in terms of our oversight, we report to a water and sewer board, which is an appointed board by essentially both boards of selectmen. It was originally obviously just a Provincetown board, and prior to this IMA being executed in 2010, Truro didn't have a seat at the table, so to speak. Once this document was outlined, that granted the town of Truro 3 regular members. We have a couple of those members present here tonight. And we meet once a month. I'll get into that, I guess, in the next slide. But it consists of 7 members and 1 alternate. There's 3 members from the town of Truro. And essentially, they're responsible for governing both water system regulations and the sewer regulations as that pertains to the Provincetown members, establishing and modifying rates and fees associated with the water and sewer system, evaluating current and future demand impacts on both water and sewer systems, and adapting master planning.
Just to jump in there, there's a couple of, there are numerous references to having Truro representation on a water and sewer board in the various conflicts that really were precipitated in the, I want to say, the 80s. The legislation that I referred to was a bill that was in 1979 August Truro Special Town Meeting passed Article 20. Under the article, Truro, to protect and promote the conservation and development of its water resources, authorized the Board of Selectmen to file a petition in general court, basically for an act further regulating the taking and holding by the town of Provincetown of water within the town of Truro. That went to the legislature in 1980, 81, but it didn't go anywhere. But what happened because of that was the 1982 intermunicipal agreement, and that basically laid out more structure to this relationship that had ever been in place before. So the 1982 agreement came about, and that was rolled over and over and over until the struggle to make a better agreement produced one, which is this, the IMA that we have right now that we're working with. So it's pretty interesting history, but I think that all of these places of friction in the past really are informing where we are right now in 2 towns really looking to try to protect this resource together. Lily, you wanted to say something?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Nodding in
Okay.
agreement.
Sorry. Sorry, Cody.
Yep, no, that's a good point. So again, the Water and Sewer Board, we hold regular monthly meetings, second Thursday of each month, unless otherwise noted. Those are at the Veterans Memorial Community Center in Provincetown on Winslow Street. Those are the current members, and in terms of Truro, we have John Dundas, Courtney Warren, and Tracy Rose, who are the appointed members.
Courtney's here, John are both here. Yep.
So that is what we're looking at there. And to Emily's point about future coordinated efforts, we are currently working on revising those plans in the IMA, specifically trying to target the watershed management plan, and revising and updating the master plan. The master plan is a little simpler process because it's had a couple iterations,
Right.
But the watershed management plan is a little more involved. So we're working collectively to try to accomplish that task. A water storage facility, North Truro, this has been something that's been discussed many times. And again, the booster station that we have on South Hollow Road is something that it takes care of business for now. so to speak. It provides sufficient pressure to the businesses and the school and so on. It does not provide sufficient fire flows to the area, and obviously when we have to take that out of service, which we've had to do even recently because of mechanical failure, that interrupts service to that portion of the system. So that's something that's in discussions, as well as new source discussions. We've spent some time on demand forecasting in Provincetown, future demand forecasting, and then I know Truro has also worked, and collectively we have documents for what the town of Truro is looking for their future demands. Anything else?
Yeah, I do think that it's important also to note in the IMA, just to back a little bit up.
Yep.
A couple of the things that the IMA has done, one of them is created the value that the system users will be charged uniformly, whether they live in Truro or they live in Provincetown. Talks a lot about the leak detection, establishes this cooperative relationship that has to happen between the governments of Truro and Provincetown for the collection of unpaid water bills. Those little things have all been set in place since this IMA was brought into being. And I do think that where we're going with the management plan is really to try to do it differently and start to build towards the next IMA, because we can see that there's some flaws perhaps in this IMA, so we can keep, I think, getting better and better at kind of codifying our relationship, because in the absence of that, there's a lot of disagreements can happen,
Sure.
misunderstandings can happen, and that's what did happen a lot through the 80s and the 90s and the early aughts until this, I think, IMA was put into place. That's just...
Yeah, no, and it's, it is a unique system for the Cape in that our facilities and sources are in the neighboring town. That's, to my knowledge, there's a little bit of sharing in the Mashpee area, I think, but it is unique. I've actually had some calls on how it's operated from towns off Cape that are looking to share a resource like this, and how is it operated, and IMAs and everything like that. So it is unique for the Cape for sure.
Mhm.
To have this relationship and how the system's laid out. But yeah, I think the IMA it's always going to be a work in progress as we evolve. And that's what we're currently doing.
Take questions?
Yeah, take questions. Please.
Are you going to moderate for us?
Yeah.
That would be great.
I'd be happy to
It's hard to do from here.
This gentleman here.
Thank you for the presentation, Cody and Emily. You've indicated that Provincetown and Truro have done forecasts for future growth and the demands that will place upon the current system. What will you need to do going forward to meet that growing demand, and what sites have you identified in the Panhandlands?
Yeah, good question. So to answer the second part in terms of site identification, there hasn't been any. We're not quite that far yet in terms of any site investigations. Obviously, land availability is limited. We know that from Provincetown's work with sourcing North Unionfield. And that took many years to secure that site and develop that site. So that will take some time to identify a viable source. And in terms of what we are doing, what was the first part? What we are doing to...
Well, you said you've identified the demand going forward in
Yep.
Provincetown and Truro. So do we feel confident that you can meet that demand at the current sites that you already have?
That's where we are, right.
Online?
That's where we are right now, if I could just
Sure.
grab a piece of this, because, you know, we have to be confident. And so we are working together to explore some of the modeling work and the assumptions that went into the modeling for the North Union Field system. And part of what we really want to look at is impacts of sea level rise and how we adapt the models that we've used to different sites and go back to the sites that were explored before North Union Field was developed. And so everything's on the table, basically. And we're at the very beginning of this process where we're planning the process itself still, Jack. So we've arranged staff meetings to happen monthly in order to meet with the consultants and move forward with developing probably either a biannual or a quarterly process with meeting with both select boards in order to keep them in the loop about how it's moving. But we're still structuring our actual planning process right now because this is the most important thing on our table between
So I've read,
the two towns.
I've read the Open Space Committee report. It's still a draft, Recreation and Open Space Committee report. And it states in there that Truro has an urgent need to identify an alternate site in the Chiquesset lens. So we're not getting all of our supply from one lens of Penn.
Mhm.
Well, what progress have we made in identifying an alternate site in the Chiquesset lens?
We're at the beginning stages. We really are. We have some ideas, but everything's on the table still, and we have to develop really, I think, some structure for how we evaluate things with our consulting engineers. So it's still an option that we're going to be looking into. So
So-
Chiquesset lens and Pamet lens.
But in order to support future housing growth,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it just as important to identify and how we can guarantee water?
Absolutely. Yes, that has to happen first.
Has to happen first.
Yep.
Thank you.
We can talk and make plans and have these conceptual goals where we want to go that needs to be substantiated by having a true and very, how do we say it? Safe yield needs to be known on many levels, right? Looking forward, 2050, looking at sea level rise. That's where we are, is really needing to feel confident in the study, the models.
Because the water is something we all have in common.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think until we have it solidified, how are we going to be able to ensure that we meet that need for everyone here in town?
Mhm.
I think that has to have the highest priority. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Georgia?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to follow up on what Jack said just a little bit. Could you discuss why you spoke to elevated tanks as being a better way to mitigate kind of what he was alluding to on the demand as that's going to increase? Because it is the physics of it. And the other part, where does the treated water from the sewer plant go out of P-Town?
So in terms of the elevated tanks, it wouldn't necessarily help overall demand in terms of meeting overall demand. It doesn't increase capacity. Those tanks are used to meet max peak hours and max days where we can't produce enough from pumping for that max day. Let's take another example, July 4th or Carnival, right? When we have these high days that are big demand on the system, if we can't pump that amount of water, obviously during high demand hours of the evening hours and so on, storage capacity, it's supplemented from storage capacity. So an additional tank on the Truro end, I think is where you're going,
Right.
John.
Mm-hmm.
What that would solve is twofold. It's going to be a more reliable pressure in the area than the booster pump station, as well as provide sufficient fire flow for the Route 6 corridor there. Right now, I think our current system is capable of around 1,500 gallons a minute, where in reality we should be seeing over 3,000.
It takes the pressure off of the system, off of the well pumping, right? By putting some in storage so that it can provide, the proper pressure all the way across the demand period.
And would the tank need to be put on land owned by Provincetown, or not necessarily, that's only
Not
for
necessarily.
wells?
Yeah,
So it could
there's
be Truro land.
right there's a little bit of work that goes into looking at a tank like this, just because of the fact that obviously our bull tanks are in Provincetown. This end of Truro that we're looking at, or that has been identified as viable sites potentially for tanks, are higher elevations, which would be higher than our current tanks. So we need to look at and work with our consulting engineers how that would be operated. This would be a segregated pressure zone in the North Truro end. And then how are we going to fill that tank? Is that coming from our distribution system, dedicated sort? How are we doing that? So there's a little bit of work there. But yes, it would help in max days for sure, help stabilize pressures in North Truro. And then in terms of the effluent, I don't operate the sewer plant, but it does go to numerous effluent beds in Provincetown, adjacent to the new police facility, the dog park,
Shores, the sides of Route 6.
sides of Route 6, yep, all down in that area is where the effluent goes.
For water storage, we're looking at 750,000 gallon tank.
Roughly.
Right.
Yep.
Now, Mount Gilboa is like 2.
So Mount Gilboa is a 2.6 million gallon tank, but the design of that tank being just a round, it's called a standpipe design. That's not all usable storage, because obviously if we get the tank down too low, then people at the higher elevations don't have pressure. And we operate, not to get into the details, but we use Winslow tank as our primary tank, because that tank is actually slightly higher than the Winslow tank, and then the Gilboa tank.
Storage is a big issue.
Rebecca?
So, thank you both. This is all new for me, and I so appreciate what you've done in Provincetown, but, some of us here are residents on well water, and I test the water, and I don't know what I can do to get better water, because I do see the salt filling up. And I also get concerned about the quantity, forget what's in the water, but the quantity of the water that gets sent to Provincetown, what's happening, where is the balance in that? Because I don't think you've spoken about how do you measure in the lens how much water there is and how much we're using as residents, because there's no meter,
Right.
and Provincetown is using it.
And does sea level rise come into play if that's coming from underneath?
Well, the well water withdrawal, private well water withdrawal is de minimis, is de minimis really compared to the public well withdrawal, but still, I can't remember the words Masterson used to characterize it, but we're really, we're not making a dent out of the Pamet lens. It's
Is Provincetown making a dent?
That's what I'm saying. The water withdrawal is, we're below. The reason that it's set where it is because of the use of it's kind of a ganging up, so to speak, of these multiple sites, but it is permitted at 0.85.
Yep.
But it can produce much more, and it does, and it is all within the permit that is commensurate with the amount of modeling and work that's been done. Paul Millett's here too from.
I've got this slide up here so that when you look at this, these out of the Paul Daly well site, for example, the 864,000 a day, and when you look at Knowles Crossing at 216,000, that we know is our safe yield. 216,000, believe it or not, is not a lot of water, not for a public water supply. The reason that safe yield is so low is because of saltwater upconing. Those wells will actually produce a lot of water, but it's salty water when we start to withdraw at high rates. So to answer the question, are we doing too much or withdrawing too much? when we look at this water management permit for North Union Field, extensive modeling work was done there to come up with that number of 734,000. That is what was done and permitted both by DEP, but our consulting engineers did a tremendous amount of modeling work there and sampling to understand how the aquifer behaves. And when I spoke to the quarterly sampling that we do at that site, specifically for saltwater upconing, we have a tremendous amount of data, and we update the model so that we can see, are we over pumping this, or does it look like it's behaving the way the model predicted? And the good news is it's behaving the way the model predicted. The first round we did there, we actually changed the way we operate the well site. After 5 years, we've modified the way we're pumping that to relax the saltwater upconing.
Another factor, though, saltwater upconing is one thing for a big well, but and depending on where you live and how thin the lens is where you are specifically with your little private well, the chance of you upconing is significantly reduced. Especially if you're towards Route 6, but that's where you're going to get more sodium is towards Route 6 because of, road salt. And that is something that will dissipate with time. And as we have, unfortunately, climate change and warmer temperatures, we will have less road salt, and so there will be less of a threat from road salt. Will they be more of a threat from salt water from sea level rise? That's something that we're still looking at, trying to really understand. So,
Emily, are you predicting the weather for March by saying there will be no snow or ice?
I am
Can we quote you?
a month late, right? The groundhog.
I have multiple questions. During your talk, you were showing us the plant, and then it has solar panels. If you use electricity, I'm assuming you guys have generators and things so that you're still pumping out that was my first question. The second question is, what's the percentage of the use of the water in the town of Provincetown versus Truro?
I think it's 11%. Is that right?
And
I've seen
there's
that
no,
number.
I'm assuming there's no push in the town of Truro for people to be on public water systems, because we're too diverse.
Excuse
I'm
me.
assuming that, but you can tell me otherwise.
So first question, all of our source supplies are protected by backup generator, with the exception of the 2 emergency sources, which never have within the seashore, but we have a portable that's available. So our primary sites, Paul Daly, North Union Field, Knowles Crossing, backup generator supply. The solar panels, I should clarify, that's through the Cape Light Compact. So we receive net metering credits on that, and we're saving money essentially. Now, the
Percentage.
I would say it's around 10. I should know that off the top of my head, but I don't right now. It's about 90 to even 92% in Provincetown, I would say, somewhere in that range. In the peak season, that can shift a little bit, of course. We did have 1 year, I think it was actually 2 years ago, we had a high year in Truro, I think, in the peak season. I think a lot of folks, after COVID, vacationed, and we saw a rise in demand in Truro that summer versus a couple other ones. But it's close to 10%, I'd say.
And as far as folks, demand for folks to connect, it's a good topic. And it's something that the IMA is actually silent on largely. And I think that, there is a process which was introduced in, I think it was 97, when basically, if you want to get on the water system and you live in Truro and you're adjacent to it and there's a main there that you can actually tie into, you have to have no other option. You have to have really bad water from your well and probably have had to drill another well to try to find good water on your property. It is not easy to get on the water system if you live in Truro because we have good water here. Whereas if it's somebody in Provincetown, the water is non-potable in that lens. So we have a process. I refer to it as a dance. I don't know if you guys do. But you fill out the form. Well, first you talk to us, the health department, and if it looks like it's a candidate because of, non-potability or whatever the contamination issue, generally pick your poison, nitrates or sodium. You fill out the form, it goes to the Board of Health for their blessing. The Board of Health will review it, and if it looks like this is clearly no other option, then they bless it, and then they send it to our select board. The select board reviews it, we talk, they bless it, goes to the Board of Water Commissioners.
Water Sewer Board.
In Truro, the Truro Provincetown Water Sewer Board, thank you. They bless it, and then it goes to the Truro Select Board. So that's a dance. It's a lot of touching of one particular thing. But it's good that there's a process, because there needs to be a process. In 1994, Highland Creamery wanted to become a restaurant instead of an ice cream place. And when the Board of Health approved it, and then it went to our select board, they approved it, and then it went to the water commissioners at the time, and they denied it. And they had excellent reasons to deny it, but it really did precipitate a big conversation about Truro being able to tie in, because that's always been part of the legislation, is that Truro could tie in, but there needs to be a substantive reason, and there needs to be supply.
Right, and so to follow up 2 points on that is one, when we talk about, you hit on that 94 thing.
Yeah.
I would say that, to my knowledge, this was before my time here, but the Stop and Shop had looked at a location on Route 6.
Yep.
Where the system had said.
Yep, and Siemens Bank was expanding.
Yeah, and the system at the time had said, look, we're going to need a tank out there.
Right.
And that was not well received. So this isn't anything new. This has been talked
Right.
about for over 30 years
Mhm.
and longer.
Mhm.
But that was, to my knowledge, it went down in flames because a tank wasn't well received, and so on. But secondly, when it comes to the growth aspect, yes, there's a mechanism in place to understand and approve these connections in Truro. Provincetown has a growth management bylaw, which over the past 2 years, we've recommended that only gallons for affordable housing be allocated under the growth management bylaw.
And it's very specific,
Very, very
they're really
specific.
counting the number of gallons based on Title V flow, which is how the sewer is indexed.
Yep, and we've taken a shift to look at and focus on peak season demand, because
That's your limiting
that's
factor.
our limitation,
Yeah.
is peak season. So we've recommended to our select board the past couple of years, and they've concurred that gallons only for affordable housing were allocated. We still have, Provincetown still has some gallons that were allocated in prior years for market rate housing and economic development and so on. And those are out there and available for anybody that has a project. But we're just recommending that we put a pause, let's look at these demands, and formulate a plan.
That goes back to Jack's question too, which is, there's a process for all of this, and there's an order for doing things, and there's lots of plans, and there's money for some of these things and not for others, but the process needs to go in a certain order. And right now, I think the concept of taking a pause and making sure that we've got the confidence in the safe yield is where we're at.
So will the housing at the Cloverleaf, and if there's housing at the Walsh property, will that all be private wells then and not municipal? And the other part of that question is that, and I'm wondering if this is some of what's going on, is I think some people's concerns is that, well, if we build more housing, do we have the water? Are there any concerns that new housing at Cloverleaf and Walsh would hurt the water supply?
So
You take
Cloverleaf
Cloverleaf.
was approved in 2019 for a connection. That infrastructure is in place. There was a water main that was laid down Highland Road and into the property under the highway, tied back in. So that's prior approved, ready to go.
Already paid for from a Mass Works grant.
Yes,
It was like, get it
installed
done.
and paid for.
Yeah.
probably in today's dollars, good value there too.
Absolutely. As far as the Walsh property goes, again, there's a proper order of things. So we're planning, but we're also making sure that we're, you know, in full awareness about what the limitations of the resource are as we look for another source. So
So
the things don't have to be mutually exclusive of each other, but they do need to be done within the proper timing, right, in the proper order. So
Whereas
there's
the number of houses is decided on, some of what is taken into account is how much water is available for that.
No, there's a conceptual number that's out there, and what we're looking at right now are the recommendations that this is where we try to be planning toward, right, where we're planning toward. Whereas we're also now trying to ensure that the water capacity, or safe yield rather, is that we're confident with that and that we're feeling safe about that, and also looking at all the options that we have for a second source.
One more question.
Well, hang on, let me get us, have some people who haven't asked yet, go ahead.
Back in 1967, we had an old beach house moved from Rich Point to Highland Avenue. When I heard of that time, we had cesspools, and when I heard that Truro was going to require septics, we made arrangements, we hired an engineer, it came through that we had to move the well about 10 feet, and that made no sense to me, so we went to the ZBA and asked for a variance to leave the well where it was to avoid the additional expense. When we got to, we were told then, check the water, have it tested, and if that's all right, we'll make a decision. We had the water tested, water came back perfectly clean with a cesspool. We go to the next meeting and we're told that because we're sitting on top of water that supplies Provincetown, we had to do an enhancement to the septic, which doubled the price and forced us to sell the house because we couldn't afford it. I want to know why, if we're supporting, if we're protecting Provincetown's water, they're not paying for these enhancements instead of putting the burden on us.
Well, we're a community out here. We all have to,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
we're a community that needs to take care of our resources. And, you know, that is, it's part of the burden of living in a place like this, you know? I don't have a better answer.
Where the water supply is provided to the city from the outskirts, the city pays for these enhancements or whatever is required to protect their water supply. I don't know why we can't do the same thing, why put the burden on us to protect the water supply for another town?
Well, that is shared by Truro. Truro residents on Beach Point enjoy the public water supply. Our school does, our municipal buildings do. So it is not just Provincetown. It's the community of the two towns together.
And you're just bringing up a valid point.
I will state that there are two or three homes on South Hollow Road across from the pumping station. Provincetown paid for and maintains the septic system that those three homes are tied into, two or three. We pump that on an annual basis, and the town actually paid to install that system because that was within our zone 1. Why this system that you speak of?
It's a zone 2.
It's a zone 2.
Yeah.
So we have in some instances because it was zone 1.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to Emily's point, the reality here is that if both communities are seeking housing goals and housing needs, there's one resource.
And we both have to protect it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Protection is key. Smart planning is key because, as I alluded, land is not plentiful. So the challenges that we've faced over the years with trying to acquire a redundant supply took 40 years in reality. 40 years. And Paul, one of our consulting engineers, is in the audience tonight, and I think the joke goes, 20 years of planning, 2 years of construction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to work collaboratively. We have to look at this as it is a shared resource here. And we do serve a great number of properties in Truro. And, the system was expanded in the late 90s to serve the school, to serve the public safety building. So that's what I'd say with that.
Beverly. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on what she said. I do have friends in New York State, and there's a program.
Mhm.
If the state has decided you have to have a certain level of clean water, either private wells or anything else, they pay. They pay, and if it's a second home, they pay. I think it's 40%, it's either 40 or 60. They pay it because it's a state mandated rule. Now, to me, it seems that this kind of thing where you say there's a zone 2 and you need to upgrade everything, yes, we are a community and we're a state. And everybody in the state should be paying for this. This is not what other states do. To have it be specifically slammed with, individuals who end up losing their homes. You say you want to have a community with a variety of income levels. Well, if you do that kind of thing and slam someone with a $70,000 septic system, you're not going to have very many people, middle-income people left. And I think that, this is a very big question, and I've asked everyone seems to be interested in bringing it to the state level, and that's where it really needs to be addressed. I feel, this is my feeling. And I'd like to hear, what you think about the fairness of doing it this way instead of doing it as other states do it, which is if you mandate it, you fund it.
I would agree with the funding aspect. I think the flip side of that is obviously the state is looking at public sewer systems at this point. I mean, the Cape is moving in this direction. It's been something that's been ignored for a long time. So I think that's the direction everybody's looking right now is public sewer systems. So in that regard, for the state to fund, I don't know. I'd have to see I guess I'm looking at this from a project scale and how many septic systems would need to be funded by state dollars when we could potentially look at state funding for sewer.
But in New York State, they're doing it all. And in many other states, they're doing it all. And I think that as a group, as a community, we should be asking our state reps, why aren't they doing this? Clean water is essential, and it's an emergency, and it should be addressed statewide the way it is in other states.
It's not addressed. It's not addressed as it is in other states, but it is addressed, right? We have the state revolving fund, which has a low interest, very low interest, and no interest loan program that's extended to the municipalities. It's been extended to Barnstable County. We have the Aqua Fund through Barnstable County, which affords folks a 0 to 4% interest rate on projects like this. So it makes it a lot easier for folks to do it, and they've committed a lot of money to the state revolving fund for that. It helps municipalities primarily, the state revolving fund directly in projects, and there is some loan forgiveness. But it's not set up like other states, but there are mechanisms in place.
I'm sorry, but when you're 88 years old and you're going to take on a debt of $50,000 to $70,000, I don't care if there's no interest on it. That's a very unreasonable request, I believe.
I understand, but and not to attract. Let me just say this and hope that it's taken with the spirit in which I intend, right? Which is kindly, but I don't believe that we're talking about a primary residence, correct? We're talking about a second home.
We're talking about a summer house that we use 2 months out of the year, which
Okay.
is the next problem.
Okay.
2 months out of the year, no washing machine, no dishwasher, no bathtub, and we were penalized with this extra element totally unnecessarily as far as I'm concerned. I think it was very unfair.
I appreciate that, and I know that it is difficult to pay for septic upgrades more and more as we go on. It's something that we talk to folks about every day.
Are there any questions from anyone who has not yet asked? I know that you said you had another question.
Thank you. For the benefit of everyone here, and perhaps for people that want to look it up online, you've spoken a lot about the intermunicipal water agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Where can one find that on the internet?
Is it on your website? Because if it's not, I don't think it's on ours, but we'll make sure that it goes up there, Jack.
Thanks.
Yep.
And just to follow up on the future predictions for water usage, where are those predictions available to someone that would want to view them?
We have not publicized those documents yet. Some of those were still in draft form, but we are working to reshape one of those documents, and we'll have those available probably on our website once they're in, not in draft form and in final form.
And to piggyback on another person's comment about supplementing the cost of installing a IA treatment system, New York State gets all of their, New York City gets all their water from a certain area further upstate. If your home has a septic system within that watershed, I'm told, and I've spoken to people that have benefited from this, that they get their system installed no cost. It's just put in because that's within the watershed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, potentially, anyone that's in the Panama Lens is in the watershed to Provincetown's public water supply and parts of Truro's extended service coming out of P-Town. I think it's very worthwhile to consider how we can further the contractual requirements of the intermunicipal water agreement, mandating that the town protect the Panama Lens and do that in a way that helps homeowners to make the change when it's necessary, but also be funded, rather than an unfunded mandate to just make that change. Thank you.
Bob, yeah?
I'm curious, what percentage are all the homes on Shore Road from Knowles Height to the line, are they all on public water? Or are there some wells?
There's no wells on Beach Point.
No wells.
Right, and there's a good mix from the vineyard down. It's not 100%. It's a little scattered, but there's also a couple little loops that go off of there too, like Firehouse Road and so on.
Yeah.
You had said that the average withdrawal that Provincetown can take is 850,000 gallons a day, and that's annualized.
Right.
And so that during the summer, they may go to 1.5 million, 1.4 million, 1.3 million. And so my question is, when you take that much over 3 or 4 months in the summer to offset what you do in the winter because you don't have the population at that time, what does that do to the source? Because now you're sucking out a lot more than what it says to allow during that 3 or 4 month period. What does that do? Does it draw more salt water up? And it affects the condition of the water?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So first off, I'll answer by saying that we monitor groundwater levels really continuously, because under our state permit, we're assigned a monitoring well in Truro. So we can see where groundwater levels are, and yes, groundwater levels always drop. That's not just because of Provincetown's public water system withdrawing water. That's obviously everybody on wells, drought conditions, so on. Groundwater levels will drop in that peak season. But yes, it does lower to a certain extent, but I've never personally seen any alarming rates. We've been through multiple droughts the last few years. We actually begin monitoring this well in March because annually we have restrictions on outdoor watering throughout the system, Truro users included. We don't allow irrigation systems. We're one of the few, if the only, public water system on Cape Cod that doesn't have irrigation systems on the public supply. We don't allow that. Hand watering only in the peak season. And oftentimes we restrict car washing, so on. So that helps a great deal with conserving. Did you have something to add in
I
terms of
wanted just to kind of ask you to help me frame this, because my understanding of the permit for the
Yep.
system, that's not based on safe yield necessarily,
the
right?
permit?
So- right.
The
It's
withdrawal
it's
annual
based
average?
on it's the permit that was issued is based on the pumping tests that were done for that well, right? So we're not looking at a permit that's based on the safe yield of the lens, right? So in other words, 0.85 doesn't mean that's the most that you should be pumping out in order to be safe in this lens. That has everything instead to do with the pumping tests that were done at the time that the wells were developed.
Yeah, the 0.85 actually comes from what's called a registration, Water Management Act registration. That was done in 1985 based on historical 3 or 5 year priors of the water system withdrawals. The state at that time started Water Management Act registration statements that said you can only withdraw this much.
Right.
And so we were 850,000. That number didn't change because we were seeking a redundant supply, which became North Union Field at 734,000. That is the reason the 850 didn't change. We're allowed to withdraw 734 max daily from that source, but overall throughout the year we still can't exceed the 850,000 a day. So it didn't add to our overall capacity. It added to the ability to meet peak demands, but you can still see even at 734,000, we're a little shy from the other two sources, which add up to a little over 1 million. So, does that answer your question?
Well, I guess I was asking is during the summer, does it not go up past the 850,000 a day?
No, sure it does.
Huh?
Sure, yes it does. We
does.
withdraw. We have days, our peak days at the moment hover right around 1.7 to 1.8 million gallons on a heavy day in July and August for demand.
So will that affect if the amount that you're drawing affect from the seawater that's below it because of the fact that you're drawing so much on a daily basis?
No, because we're pumping at a constant rate, meaning we don't just turn the pumps up to, let's say, 1,000 gallons a minute in one well. We're pumping these at a constant, slower rate, and that upconing is minimized because of that.
And we know this because of all the monitoring wells that have been established around the wells that are constantly being checked to see where your sodium levels are.
Right.
And that's the regular program. It's not just in the season.
Cody, tell everyone about the upgrading of meters and all of the work that your team does in the stewardship of the distribution if there's a leak or anything. I think that's part of what people are, the use of in Provincetown. I mean, it is, you guys are really on it, paying attention to any leaks.
Yeah, so the metering system, that's a cyclical basis. We're constantly upgrading meters in terms of older meters and so on. Again, electronic is the way we've gone over the radio read. Some of the meters are a little smarter nowadays where they hold data. We can help customers understand their use by downloading data. We have to physically be present at the site. We can download data, show a report to a customer on the newer meters. Leakage control has been a challenge for many years in Provincetown, given the nature of the soil conditions and so on. It's very, very difficult to detect leaks in the system because of the pipe material, soil conditions, but we're on it. We conduct annual leak detection surveys either with our own staff or we hire outside help to come in to conduct those. We've done a good job overall managing leaks. The state recommends a 10% compliance standard. 17 and 18, we met that standard for the first time in many, many years. and it's an up and down trend. And unfortunately, we've had a few staff retire and move on. We're training new staff, and that's a continuous basis where we're constantly training for leak detection. It's a challenge out here, but it's something I think we've done a good job at reducing overall over the last 20 years. It used to be, quite high.
30%.
But we've done a good job. Our operators do a good job at recognizing. We can tell now with technology based. We can get in the morning and we can kind of get an idea. We just had this happen the other day. We got in, we saw the nightly flow rates were elevated. We knew we had a problem in the system. By 1 o'clock, there was a leak identified on a side street on the water main.
That's awesome.
So we try to get them solved as fast as possible.
We've been here a long time. I didn't want to cut us off though because of your interest. Look,
Just on the back, and for those of you who came to part one of the water, I mentioned that I have a company that will provide septic cleaning. If you partner up with somebody, a few people, they will give us a deal. So as some of you know, we do our septics every 2 years as a way to help manage the water. And I will be calling the company, I think it's, what did I say, Nauset Septic. And they said, yes, if you give us 2 or 3, 4 more names, if you come as a group, they'll come that same day and they'll give you a deal.
And ideally be folks that are close together.
Correct.
Yeah. And the idea also behind that is to try to get the wastewater, the low-hanging fruit of wastewater management handled in the off-season, and the emergencies and all the big volume happening in the season when, it takes care of things, I think, flattens it out for the guys.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Let me know if you have questions.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Very much appreciated.
It's great.
Thank you to everyone.